The fire service is a lifestyle. Some of us grew up knowing that this is what we would do. Others found it later in life. We all have a story to tell. We live a career of experience and knowledge. But what happens when we retire? All that knowledge and experience walks out the door. Welcome to Capture the Knowledge.
I walked in the doors here at 61, 55 years, and 6 months ago, you had to pass a three-part test. You know, they had a written test, and then they had the doctor's exam, and then a board of some of the board members and the chief, and your interview, and that's it. There was no academy. There was no agility test or anything like they had later on, you know. They assumed if the doc found you healthy, you could do the job. But it's weird. They did have requirements. They said for my height, I had to weigh at least 170 pounds. And I just barely did. And they had silly things like that of height requirements and, you know, height weight chart that you had to be. They thought they were picking the best people that way, I guess. But when they first started with no academy, you just learned on the job. And you were attached to a senior firefighter or perhaps an engineer, and you just did whatever he said, followed him, do whatever he did, and he talked and you listened, and it was just hands-on OJT. You know, that's the way it worked. And there's a lot of good things about that. The subjectivity is not good, but on the other hand, you really did learn a lot in a fairly short time, and you learned it, you know, right from the horse's mouth, so to speak. You learned it by actually feeling it, observing it, and all that kind of thing. And I was saying before that one of the first calls was on the rescue unit where we had 3 people, and we went to a call where 4 or 5 little kids were hitting a crosswalk by a lady who was going pretty fast. And she didn't have her glasses and she didn't see them. So it was tragic. So we get there, there's less of us than there are kids who are hurt. So we divide up and try to go to one of the kids, try to make a quick assessment of which one is, you know, but you can't really until you get there. So this little girl was, she died in my hands. Her skull was fractured and probably trachea, internal organs, whatever. She was bleeding out her mouth, laying on her side, and all I could do was try to keep her tongue out of the way and keep her airway open, and she was breathing for a little while. And then her pulse, I could see the blood coming out, pushed by her heart, and her pulse slowed down, and she died. And I remember coming back. We got back and we talked about it. The assistant chief said, you guys, I want you to talk about it. And I can remember, you know, each of us were talking about how you can do what you can do, but you're going to have calls like that where they die. They're too far gone, or you just don't have any way. And we didn't have paramedics. We weren't going to do an IV or anything like that. And I can remember hearkening back to my dad's words when he was a firefighter, and my mom being horrified at some of the stories, some of the things that he saw. And what he said was, well, while you're doing it, you keep doing your job. You keep doing as you're trained and do the best you can, because if you get affected by it too much at the time, you're not going to do your job well, and you're not going to be able to help somebody to the best. And vice versa, long term, if you let things affect you too much, then you're not going to be able to do your job. And you're going to say you have another call that's bad, in really close to that, or maybe even later on. If you let that affect you too much that you don't do your job. So his advice, and what my advice would be for the young guys, is just think about doing your job. It's part of the job. You're going to see some terrible things and be emotionally affected, but you got to, the goal in mind is to keep doing your job, whether it's for 30 years or whether it's for this week. To not be affected by that kind of stuff. And I don't know if that sounds like too simple of a way to handle the stress and things. We didn't have a critical incident stress team or anything like that, but It worked. And I think it worked for most of us. And the number of guys that are retired today who are enjoying their retirement and are happy and aren't permanently affected by the stress and the emotions of those times show that you can get through it. You keep doing your job. Been retired for 25 years.
Okay.
And I really recommend it. It's great. Give it an A+. I've enjoyed it very much. And that is one of the nice, unique things about this job. You can put in 30 years and still retire quite young. You know, and just imagine guys like Iman Usher and some of those guys that started when they were 19 and they retire after 30 years, how young they can be, you know.
Right.
Wow. I think I was 22, just turned 22 when I hired on. So 52 and a half, I retire. January 1, 1966.
And you said that your father was also a firefighter.
He was.
Where?
In the 50s for CDF, Schedule A, in and around Fresno in the San Joaquin Valley. They had runs all the way from Porterville to Avenal to Kings County. Big swath of land out there. He used to talk about having a 70-mile run to the fire. And of course, there was just ashes and foundation when they got there sometimes, but they had to make the run.
Sure.
There was nobody else. And they would be the first one there after coming 70 miles. But, you know, things are really spread out. And if some of these little towns or some of these ranches, they didn't have any good firefighting equipment, even though, you know, there were people encouraging them to do so. We were much more rural. We had more grass fires than anything else. And the number of, you know, houses, I think our population was like 15,000 just before I hired on, and maybe 19,000 because Aerojet and Douglas and Mather were hiring and getting a lot of people, so they were coming in here, you know. But say 19,000 and fairly confined to just a fairly small area, and all the rest of it was wide open. And we had a nice working relationship with all the ranchers and the farmers out in the boondocks. Mm-hmm. And the best roads to get there and which bridges you could cross and which you couldn't. Where the fords were, you know, having to know stuff like where the fords were. A lot of these young guys know, what's a ford? Besides being, you know, pretty rural, I remember before I hired on, the first big fire I saw was a fire in the hop barns, the kilns, where they cooked the hops down at the Denhauer Ranch, which is about where Paseo Drive is now. It made a heck of a fire. Those are great big buildings that are real open, and they're made out of wood, and it was spectacular. And of course, they burned down. There really wasn't a lot you could do. There wasn't a good water supply. And once they got going, man, like I say, just hundreds of grass fires. And we got pretty good at it. It was hit the head. An aggressive attack was our method. And we had rigs, some of which were homemade, which could do a pretty good job in that type of firefighting. You know, you didn't fight it from the inside or anything else. You went after it, got out ahead of it, and tried to hit the head, stop the forward progress. You know, mostly it worked. Sometimes you'd have a real hard wind and a spread out fire, and it would have fingers that would be just going right by you while you're stopping the head. It would start new heads. Learning how fast those grass fires can move. I remember one time had to jump in a ditch and got one side of my mustache burned off. I was with the captain on a little pickup grass rig, and that fire turned and came toward us like that. All of a sudden, it's going this way, and then it's going this way, and you're right there. And if there hadn't been a ditch to jump into, we could have got burned. I tried to teach that to the younger guys over the years when I was captain, that those flashy fuels out there in the Florin area and out further out, how fast they can move and how the wind can change. And I remember teaching them, you look for a whirlwind. If you see a whirlwind, that means there's a wind shear. There's two winds that are crossing each other, and the wind blowing the fire that you're fighting can suddenly change, and the fire's not going in the same direction it was a minute ago. Maybe it's coming right at you, and it's coming fast on a windy day out there. And little things like how the the wind can be faster, the humidity can be lower, and the temperature can be higher. Out in the, once you get out past, say, where Aerojet, Hazel, and those roads are now, it's different than it is on the official forecast for Sacramento. They got higher humidity, maybe a little lower temperature, and not as strong winds. But out there, there's old water courses, gullies, and the wind just rushes right up there, especially in the afternoon. But that was interesting. And then the parkway, which wasn't a parkway then, it was private land owned by the Natomas Company, and all those dredger tailings. And it was interesting fighting a fire down in there too, because of the bad footing from all the rocks and stuff too. And then the exposure of, they let them build shake roof houses along Ambassador when they first put them in. And the danger of a fire getting out of that parkway and into the houses was always there. But we had, Aerojet, we had the base. I was on a couple of more planes went down. We were on the B-52 going down out there at Jackson and Bradshaw. And I still had nightmares for years about this poor horse that got blown up and cooked in an instant, so fast that he split down the middle, and he was laying about a quarter mile from where his pasture was, where the plane hit. He was laying down there with his feet up in the air, split open, cooked. And that's what we saw when we were first coming in. We were assigned to go around to the other side where there was a little trailer park and people living in there, to get there quickly to see, if the fire was, because there was fire everywhere. That thing was full of fuel. And that was something I saw in my mind for years, that poor horse. I don't know why that stuck with me so much, but never seen anything like that. So it was interesting to me as a young guy, and almost everybody, exception of Mike Spych and Cal Webster and guys that I went to high school with, all the other guys were older than us, 8-10 years older. Most of them had been in the military. They were quite comfortable with the semi-military, the paramilitary regime of a fire district, of the way the chain of command and the way the structure worked. And some of us, we're in the younger guys in the Vietnam era and stuff, and we kind of had an adjustment to get into the paramilitary regime. I had an advantage because my dad was a firefighter, but some of the guys, there was an adjustment period, and there was a little friction with the old guys, of do as you're told and don't think about it. We always said, well, why? Or why that way? Or, this kind of thing. But we did learn a lot, and there was a nice variety to it. And we had a close relationship, the chiefs particularly with OAS. And in fact, used to have regular visits from number 2 at OAS, and we always had an OAS engineer. And I think both Elmer and Bob were at different times the regional mutual aid coordinator for OAS. So we always went on OAS, whatever it was. We were one of the first ones out.
Yeah.
And you learned a lot from that. And we had a reputation because the guys used to participate when I came in, particularly, and for years, so say 10 years, they were really into the tri-district drills that we used to have with Florin and Slough House and some of the other ones where we would do an evolution, And we were always the winners. We were the best. Those guys were good. And they used to win pretty regularly at the Cal Rural drills, which were still going on. I don't even know if that still exists. Salinas Rural and us were always number 1 or number 2 in the evolution drills at the Cal Rural conferences and stuff. Well, usually it was some sort of a standard thing of hitting a hydrant, laying the hose, deploying the hose lines, and knocking over something or hitting the target with the hose lines in a certain amount of time. And one of them that was always there was included drafting. Mm-hmm. And so you take the big hard sections off the OAS engines because everybody had to use the same engine. So you have even competition, you know. And setting up, they had a big tub, you know, one of those big portable tanks. And setting up getting your hard section in water and getting your draft, and then pumping it to the hose lines, and at a certain distance, you know, and then the target was a little distance beyond that. And we were always really right there.
Great.
One time I was on the second team because those guys on the first team, they weren't giving up their spot. And they were good. They were really good. They would just, it's like music, it's orchestration, you know, their timing and their speed of going through the things, of knowing exactly how many turns on that hard section, where the key is to hit the threads right, and doing it so fast, you know, getting that thing in the water. They were good. On the fire ground, we were as good as anybody as far as getting water on the fire quickly and accurately, you know. And we used to do a lot of hit the fire with fog quick, through the window, through the door. They kind of changed over the years to more of a straight stream interior attack and go in and push the fire out rather than push the smoke and fire in. Then sometimes they seem to come back towards the fog. I've seen a lot of changes, I tell you, and nobody's right all the time. They think that, well, this is the thing to do, but over time you get some experience, and maybe this other way was pretty good. And then it goes back the other way, you know. And I can remember we put out a lot of fires darn quick while the bigger lines in the interior attack was getting ready. We had the fire out.
From the exterior.
From the exterior, through the window, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how that affects the people inside depends a lot on where they are inside. You know, if they're right inside that window and you're blowing the steam and the heat back into them, but if they're already affected by the heat and it turns your nozzles flow into steam, they're probably gone anyway. But, you know, that was one of the concerns. They said, no, you shouldn't be pushing that heat back in. But if they're down low and they're already affected, I don't know. It was interesting, and it was fast to do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But things come and go, just like hose loads. I don't know how many different hose loads over the years. We'd get a new batch of people in, and they would do some research with what LA was doing or what somebody else was doing, and then we would change the hose load. And then 5-10 years later, they'd change the hose load again. And in the end, I swear, when I left, we had come back to what was there when I started.
One full career's worth of changes.
We'd come back to the very same thing, but well, practicing the evolutions is a lot. I mean, sometimes they would say, we have to do that again? But yeah, you're going to do it again until we get better. And I would always be picking places like the Anderson Ranch where you were going to have a really long lay, because the hydrant is out at Folsom Boulevard, and and it's a big old house back in there. And it's not, that's your only source of water. You know, later on they built some, at the end of Mirror del Rio, some other hydrants, but they would say, we're going to have to clean and and dry all that hose just for this. Well, yeah, we're going to see if it really works, and we're going to see how long it takes to get water on a fire back there. Because when it's on fire, that's no time to be wondering if it's going to work.
Right.
You practice it ahead of time. And the other thing I was always big on was really, as part of that, knowing your long lays, is knowing your first in area. I mean, really know it. I know that's difficult now because they move people around, and even people say you want a promotion or whatever, you're going to be moved out of the area where you're comfortable. I think management, the chiefs, ought to consider sometimes keeping some people in an area that they're familiar with and really know well longer. And if not the captain, maybe the engineer, but trying to keep somebody in an area that really knows that area, that there's great value in that. And if you can have one on each shift, whether it's a firefighter, captain, or engineer, it's always going to be there. It can help. And one of the examples, I think I talked last time, we had seen the houses and the triplexes in Gold River being built. We knew it was that small small dimension lumber triangulation. And they had some peculiar things that we noticed when they were being built. You got a fire, it looks like on the roof on this side, and you see a door on the house. You think that door goes to where that fire is, and it's not so. You have to go around the back to go to the door for that one. And one time they had moved me over to the truck on 66 because they didn't have a truck captain. And Farrell was left at 65. We didn't have the truck there then. And he was new to that area, you know, after the merger. And they had a fire down there in those triplexes in Gold River. And they went in the wrong door because they didn't know. But if there had been somebody, you know, my old engineer or somebody that was there, they would have said, no, no, no. It's not how it looks. You know, here's how you have to go to get in there. And it pretty much burned the top off of that one. Because they're small dimension lumber in this big old attic and high ceilings, and man, it runs in there.
Mm-hmm.
It really runs. Well, I'd tell them it's the greatest job in the world. It has excitement, it has variety, it has great benefits and pay, and you can retire young. There's just so many good things about it. There's seldom ever each day is the same. You know, there's you never know. You never know what's going to happen, and you're going to train on a wide variety of stuff. It's not going to be the same thing every day like a lot of jobs. Well, there's not much variety to it, where you'd get bored to death. And I used to try to recruit young women that seemed to be big, strong people, and tell them, you don't want to take a job as a lawyer or a sociologist. You're going to get bored to death. You're an athletic, outdoor person. Why don't you consider coming to the fire district?
Yeah.
Used to go up to they had the Pacific Coast Rowing Championships up here at Lake Natoma. They still do, as far as I know. And we would go out there to keep people from putting their barbecues out in the grass and stuff, you know, and just patrolling around. And I would see these groups of young women, and I would just always start talking to them and say, because I thought, there's some future firefighters there, you know. They just don't know it yet. But if I plant the seed, then maybe they'll want to do that, you know. And it won't be just all guys. We'll have the women who can do it. Mm-hmm. If we can just get out there early enough and you know, get them started in this job. I was standing in one group. They were all taller than me. They were all more muscular. The one gal that was the same height as me, she weighed about 230 pounds. She was a shot putter and discus thrower when she wasn't on the rowing team. I mean, they were some strong people. That's what I want. That's what I want for firefighters, you know. But I tell the young guys, it's the greatest job in the world. It's a kind of a military regime. In the long run, that's the best way to do it. There's a reason that it's paramilitary. You know, when they had volunteers in fire departments after, you know, from Ben Franklin on, and it was pretty disorganized, and they'd be fighting over a fire or something, you know, who's going to be the one, and which one had their fire mark. The people coming out of the Civil War organized, and you know, so the modern fire department is organized along military lines, because that's what works the best. When you think about a war and a battle, think about fire and a battle, you know. And in fact, when you go on the OES runs, they call them campaign fires, right? Mm-hmm. So the military is what works. And I tell the guys, you need to get used to that and believe that in the long run it works the best. Try to learn it and to work in that way, because that's what's going to be the best. You can't all just go off doing your own thing. And you can't stop and ask questions along the way. You know, when the fire's on, you're on. And there's no saying, well, why don't we do this instead? Or, well, what about, you know, it's got to be, here's the order, follow it, do it now. In the long run, you'll like it. You'll find that if you want to give orders, then try to make captain. Otherwise, you'll like it, because there is structure, and it's good. Mm-hmm. It's good. You know where you stand. You know what you're supposed to do. You know, you can almost do it automatically, and therefore you're a very efficient firefighter. Well, it's in a way, it's another thing that requires practice. So use your time off, particularly when you have a long vacation period, and practice how it's going to be, and work with your spouse, because there can be friction when you retire with your spouse, especially if she's still working, or just that you're underfoot all the time. She's not used to that. She's used to having time separate. But practice in your days off, practice with deciding what you're going to do, managing your time, setting up your own tasks, and including lots and lots and lots of recreation. Because when you're retired, you're going to have lots of time for recreation. And in fact, you may wear out the recreation that you think you're going to do. You may go fishing like crazy for 3 or 4 years and then say, man, I'm tired of fishing. Cultivate 2 or 3 things that you like to do, and it will help you a lot. And then the other thing is, you don't have to change over entirely. You can still stay in touch. And I think it's really good for guys to get together. We used to have, before COVID, we'd have a lunch for a bunch of guys over at Golden Corral, I think it is. And then we have a bunch of guys, really old guys, that get together up at Red Hawk Casino and have lunch. And then there's other guys that get together for breakfast when they get off shift, and then sometimes retired guys will get together with them, and have breakfast at the same time. I think that's good. I think it gives an example to the younger guys that haven't retired yet, and it also keeps the older guys connected and remembering how much fun it was and how the camaraderie was. Just be ready for retirement. Be ready financially. They have the advantage of deferred comp and some things we didn't have. We didn't have it. And when I retired, it was at 75% of salary. Way back 25 years ago, and inflation really eats into it. If I'd had more time to put it in deferred comp, which I only had about the last 5 years of my career, I know some guys that they're making more from their deferred comp than they are from PERS, believe it or not, because they put into that. And I would tell them, every time you get a raise, whether it's your step raise or there's a contract raise, take half of the money and put it into your retirement. And keep doing that every time you get a raise over your career, and you will have a really healthy amount, and you won't be like some of us guys where you're somewhat impoverished by inflation.
Yeah.
You'll be able to keep up and work closely with your spouse about how it's going to be when you retire and when she's going to retire, or he, but how they're going to handle it too, and think it out. But don't retire with a whole bunch of unused vacation time and then not know how to retire. Practice. Take your vacation time and do some stuff. Have some fun with the kids when you're younger, and just with your wife or buddies when you're older. A lot of these guys that go on the charter fishing trips and go down to Mexico and all that kind of stuff, and you got time to do that. You got time to go duck hunting up at the refuges up in the Northern Valley, Get a big bunch of you and go hunt ducks. And do it for days on end if you want,
Yeah.
It's wonderful. If you have your mind together when you retire, and you've practiced and you're ready for it, and you've cleared up any health issues, whether it's mental or physical, retirement is just wonderful. I mean, you have a privilege that not very many people have, of being able to retire under a really strong system with good money at a fairly young age. Because I remember seeing people get hurt 6 months before they were going to retire and have to go out on disability and be injured pretty darn bad. And when you don't have to do that and you have an opportunity to go earlier, do it. Do it. 30 years is enough. I can't think of what else, but that'd be the main things in my mind to be telling the guys and gals. I can remember a lot of fun. I mean, so much fun that the fun police would have busted you. And you see some of the signs here at 61, you know, up all night and howling at the moon. And that kind of togetherness, camaraderie, spirit, what they call it, esprit de corps, is really great and will be remembered all your life. And those bonds that you form with each other are forever. Like the recent demise of my good buddy Mike Speich, who was the last president of our Mills One Club. Him and Calvin and guys I went to high school with, you know, and then died from lung cancer and other cancers and stuff. But boy, did we have some fun times. And I guess it's unique. I don't think even the cops, even the military, has the kind of thing that you can have in the 30-year career in the fire service in terms of friendship, brotherhood, camaraderie. It's just unique. We tell that to the young guys too, being recruited, that you're going to be in something that's involves your whole life, involves your everyday life, and there's nothing like it.